For those of you who don't know me, I am Dina Chisholm, and I've had the pleasure of serving you guys for the past 4 years as the research director for the TANGO2 Research Foundation. And today it's my privilege to talk about a topic that's really central to everything we do at T2RF, the voice of our families, you guys. So research is really, really impactful when it reflects the experiences, the priorities, and the needs the individuals it's intended to serve. So today, I'm going to be sharing with you guys the perspectives of our families and how it's helping shape research priorities, drive meaningful outcomes, and guide future TANGO2 research. So again, thank you all so much for being here. And let's go ahead and dive into some of this important work. So earlier this morning, Jonathan shared what we learned from the TDD Research Priority Landscape and Priority Survey. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes or so building on that particular discussion. We did that survey because we wanted every member of our community, families, clinicians, healthcare professionals, researchers, to have the opportunity to share their perspectives, regardless of language or geographic location, and to make sure that we really created something that reflect all the voices of our stakeholders. Our convening advisory board took the time, about 4 months or so, to develop and carefully craft a meaningful survey. And their goal was to do something that was accessible and capable of capturing insights that were the most important to our community. We distributed this survey, most many of you did, electronically from April through June. And we this year made it available in 5 different languages. So English, Spanish, French, Arabic, and Portuguese. And as John mentioned a little earlier, we got nearly 180 responses. That's 3 times the amount of people who participated in 2024. So thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. And this level of engagement really demonstrates a growing commitment across our community to helping shape the future of research that really reflect the perspectives of what's really important to our community. So, community feedback has directly shaped the foundation's priorities and activities over the past several years. So, in 2024, families identified several recurring challenges, including delays in diagnoses, limited treatment options, caregiver burden, and also the unpredictability of metabolic crisis. And honestly, just a general lack of awareness and understanding among some of our clinical community. And I really want to highlight that when we collect this information from you all, it's not just simply collect it. We want to use it to guide our work, and we want to continue to demonstrate to you guys, the community, transparency and accountability. So, in response to what we learned in 2024, the TANGO2 Research Foundation expanded support for families through new educational resources. We launched a global community research forum. We established a 24/7 TDD clinical consult hotline, which Christina Miyake highlighted earlier this morning. And we are continuing to invest in research aimed at improving care, advancing treatments, and accelerating scientific discovery. So these are just a few examples of how we're listening to our community and how we're responding as its needs are evolving. As the TDD landscape continues to grow, we remain committed to ensuring that the voices of all of you help guide our priorities, our programming, and our research investments. So, and again, one of our most notable findings from this survey, as John kind of pointed to a little bit earlier, is that one thing I found that was really interesting when I looked at that data, there was not one single priority that dramatically outperformed the others. So the rankings were actually remarkably close, suggesting that families view many aspects of Tango 2 as equally important and interconnected. So while understanding the underlying biology of TDD remains a top priority, respondents also placed really strong emphasis on research aimed at addressing cardiac, metabolic, and neurological symptoms, as well as improving overall quality of life. So what does this tell us? This tells us that the community is looking for a balanced research portfolio and one that advances our understanding of disease mechanisms while also pursuing practical solutions that can improve daily life and long term outcomes. So rather than focusing on just one single area, families are asking us to continue making progress across multiple fronts simultaneously. So, for TANGO2 Research Foundation, this reinforces the importance of supporting a diverse range of research projects. So, from basic science and biomarker discovery to translational and clinically relevant studies like the TANGO2 Natural History Study, which we talked about a little earlier this morning. So, when people believe their voices will influence real decisions, they're willing to engage. That's exactly what patient centered research is supposed to look like. So, perhaps even more encouraging than what the community prioritized was that we learned the community is really, really willing to engage in research. And the data shows that families are not only interested in research, but they're ready to partner in research. So, families trusted us enough to tell us where we could do better. It's now our responsibility to respond. And when families do participate and partner in research, they want opportunities that are accessible, transparent, and respectful of their time and circumstances. So, community engaged research only works when people see their voices produce visible change. So every time we act on community feedback, we're really strengthening trust for the next survey, the next research study, the next generation of research. Otherwise, engagement becomes performative instead of meaningful. So, to sum up all this data and what it means, I would say that these findings represent a shift from us from being study subjects to becoming research partners. Again, patient centered research is increasingly becoming the expectation across funding agencies and research organizations because it ensures that research really addresses the outcomes, the challenges, and the priorities that matter most to everybody in this room rather than conducting research solely from just a scientific perspective. Patient centered approaches engage everyone as an active partner in research, from setting priorities and designing studies, also to interpreting and sharing results. So, for the rare community, this approach is extremely important. Patients and caregivers often present a unique expertise about their condition that really helps researchers better understand the disease burden, identify meaningful outcomes, improve study participation, and also accelerate the development of treatments that have a real world impact. So, by working together, we can ensure that limited research resources are invested where they can make the greatest impact. So, we've heard throughout presentations, our community is not simply asking for research, they're asking for research that reflects what they value most. Again, the survey findings show that families are ready to move beyond participation to partnership. That shift is at the heart of patient centered comparative effectiveness research, or SARE. And again, that's approach that brings everybody to the table. So, parents, caregivers, researchers, and clinicians to ensure that the research addresses questions and the outcomes that matter most. So, over the next 2 days, we'll explore what patient centered research looks like in practice, including how stakeholder engagement strengthen study design, how research priorities are developed, how meaningful outcomes are identified, and how tools such as the PCOTS framework can help share impactful research questions. We'll also learn about funding opportunities available to support this important work within the rare disease community. And again, to help guide us through this concept, it is my pleasure to introduce Courtney Clyett, who is the Senior Program Officer for the Patient Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI. And PCORI is a national funder and a leader in advancing patient centered comparative effectiveness research and really has helped transform how patients and families engage throughout the research process. So please join me in welcoming Courtney.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I think some of you may have been here a few years ago and heard me speak a bit more about PCORI. For those of you that were here 2 years ago, can you raise your hands? All right, so that's the majority of the room. But then there are some others who may be somewhat new to either PCORI or CER. And so I'm going to share a bit more with you about where I work and what we fund. And I really do appreciate that there was an opportunity for you all to hear back what you all shared, what you all said was important to you, because that's really, as Dina said, at the heart of the work that PCORI does. It is about the voice of the communities that are impacted by the health condition and making sure that their voices are heard in the development of that research. So I think disclosures, we'll start with that. I'm a PCORI staff member. That's pretty much it. And I'm also the program officer for this award. And I think I've been with the team for at least the last 3 years or so. And it's really been heartwarming for me also to see the development and just, in a sense, maturity that you all have had over the last few years. And hopefully in the future, there'll be other opportunities to share your story. In the rare disease space, recognizing that there are some challenges and limitations because of the requirement of comparators, and often there aren't proven effective interventions. And so really, I think in the next exercise that you have after my presentation will be an opportunity for you to look at how you can hone in on the outcomes that are important and then develop them into priorities. So the learning objectives for this presentation are really kind of what I just mentioned. At the end of my presentation, I do hope that you'll have the opportunity to have a better understanding of what is comparative effectiveness research, as well as being able to identify the elements of it. And so I will get into it. So when looking at comparative effectiveness research, I should start with the basics of it. So to start, PCORI funds CER, which is research that compares at least 2 available health treatments. This is where it gets a little challenging for rare disease, services, or care delivery strategies. PCORI seeks research proposals that compare clinical interventions and healthcare delivery systems interventions. And so those healthcare delivery system interventions can evaluate benefits and harms of different treatment options, generating evidence that empowers patients, caregivers, and the broader healthcare community with information to make informed choices that reflect their healthcare needs and preferences. Characteristics of a PCORI-funded CER project includes patient-centeredness, meaning that the CER addresses the questions and concerns of patients and caregivers. The comparative effectiveness also, as I mentioned earlier, compares at least 2 healthcare treatment services or practices. That the research is patient engaged, meaning that it is research that has been deemed meaningful to your community. And then also that is applicable so that it can be applied in various settings across the U.S. healthcare system. So when trying to better understand what is CER and I figured it may be helpful to share some examples taken from some funded research projects. And the first one there, surgery versus medication in the treatment of appendectomy, apparently that's actually applicable also on TV. So that study was used as an example in the show, the HBO show, The Pit, where they looked at, there was a patient that had come in and they weren't sure whether or not that patient really needed to have surgery for their appendicitis. And so they were able to use the findings from that PCORI funded study to, and they kind of showed it kind of working out, I guess, on TV. And so that's one of the examples of CER that PCORI is funded, along with comparing different inhalers for patients with severe asthma, as well as comparing different anesthesia approaches, as well as telehealth approaches. So, PCORI is fairly laser focused on that concept of patient centeredness. As you can see here, all research teams really should include patients at the center, as well as, often the voice for the patient can be that family caregiver or other caregiver, as well as a care team. So, we recognize that community based organizations, researchers, clinicians, healthcare and hospital systems, training institutions, as well as purchasers, payers, policymakers, and industry folks are all a part or can be a part of a research team. And each of those fall under our stakeholder categories. All right. So, in this next slide here, I want to share a little bit more about the PCOTS framework. And so, as I mentioned, you'll be getting into that in a little bit. I want to kind of break down what the PCOTS framework is and how it is recommended. It is not required, but it is helpful for folks to use the PCOTS framework when they're developing their research questions. So, with the PCOTS framework, I think your next exercise may focus maybe not on the setting aspect, but definitely on all of the other letters. And let me break that down for you. So the P is population, and that is the group who will be participating in the study. The I and the C are often paired together because once an intervention is determined, then you have to identify what the comparator is. And you want to be able to clearly define what the control condition is. So when you're looking at a comparator that could be usual care, you want to be able to have something that it then compares to in the newly introduced intervention. Outcomes, there are primary and secondary outcomes that should be defined and measurable. You want to look at the timing as well. And so I'll cover that in a future slide. And then, as I mentioned, settings, setting for like if it's going to be in a hospital system or a clinic system. So getting a little bit further into this table here kind of outlines the elements of proposed research that PCORI funds. And so, for instance, I mentioned the population should be those who are impacted by the health condition. The interventions should be those that are compared, meaning that in comparing the interventions, there has to be proven efficacy, meaning that there is clear evidence that the interventions work, whether it be for a symptom of the condition or for the condition as a whole, and things that are also widely used. And I think Dr. Miyake may have touched on this a little earlier about how, when you have a standard practice of care, but sometimes you have to, not I don't want to use the word intervene, but you have to venture out from what may normally be the understood practice of care, and particularly when you're dealing with rare diseases. And so we're just looking at that. Yes, we have this treatment that is proven effective for many other people, but we have this special case here where it can be compared to that treatment can be compared to another intervention or another the comparator. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with my words here. So PCORI defines things being usual care as things that are generally used within healthcare systems. So outcomes then should be clinically meaningful and should also be previously validated. So part of the challenge that rare disease communities may face is that PCORI does not fund the development of outcomes or outcome measures. PCORI does not develop or fund the development of outcome measures. So proposed outcomes should be the best ones to answer the research question and should be meaningful to those with a lived experience. And the time frame, over what time period you hope the study to occur. And the next slide here, this is an example from a funded project. So you'll see that there was a population of 90 children that were treated with the intervention, and the outcomes are laid out here as well. but it took 7 years for this project from the time that it was funded until the time that it was completed. So there's also that, that timing, like often our research projects may have some challenges with recruitment, particularly with rare diseases. And sometimes there's a recognition that there's a little bit more time that's needed, especially when developing that engagement aspect of a research project as well. So I wanted to also provide you all with maybe a better understanding of outcomes and how outcomes can be described in various ways. First, outcomes, as I mentioned earlier, must be clinically relevant. And traditionally, outcomes have been described as biomedical measures or the results of lab tests. However, we recognize that patient centered outcomes don't always fit into that narrow category. So, this table describes a few different ways that you can measure outcomes with some corresponding examples. So, for if the measure is mortality, you can look at infant death rate. If the measure is physiologic measures, then you can look at blood pressure. So, just to give you some ideas of some of the examples that can be used when identifying what outcome you're hoping for. So, PCORI funded research has to abide by certain methodological requirements. And so this slide here just provides you with a better understanding of how outcomes come into play when you're developing those outcomes and also developing a strong, rigorous PCORI or proposal that you'll be potentially submitting to PCORI. This is part of our methodology, and I've linked the source information there. But in general, it states that measuring outcomes are necessary for your research proposal, and outcomes should be measured using the people that are representing the population of interest. And things that they've identified that they notice or that they care about. As Dina covered earlier, you all have mentioned particular things that are important to you. So those are the outcomes or the issues of interest for you. And one way to determine what is important to a population of interest is to ask that population. That's what was done. You responded to the survey. One method that's been funded by PCORI and has been proven effective is the SEED method. And so I've seen a lot of projects in my portfolio that have focused on using the SEED method. And the SEED method really it's a tool that can also be found on the PCORI website. But it's they kind of broke up the words in order to find the word SEED. So it is the stakeholder, so that's the S, engagement. In question, they took the E from question, development and prioritization. So it's a stakeholder engagement methodology that combines participatory modeling and question development with a review of available evidence. So often folks will start out with like a landscape assessment, identifying what treatments may be available, or diagnostic tools may be available. And then the next step from that is then to determine what priorities can then be developed out of, like, what do we know exists? How then can we apply it to what is our interest? And then from those priorities, you can then link back to the outcomes. Oops, I'm pressing the wrong thing. The outcomes that I mentioned before. So what are your priorities? What are some measurements? What are some outcomes that we can then look at? So this is a slide sharing a little bit more information about an upcoming funding opportunity. We do have a rare disease PCORI funding announcement where there is an applicant hall that'll be August 12th. That applicant hall is an opportunity to learn more about the funding opportunity, as well as potentially ask questions. And then the letter of intent is due on September 9th. So you can also request a meeting with a program officer. So this is, I should clarify that this is more or less for the researchers in the audience who may be interested in applying to PCORI for this funding opportunity. PCORI, for our research side, we only fund hospital systems and institutions that are identified as research institutions. So this is a little bit more about the structure of our funding opportunities. And as noted there, our cycle 3 deadline for our letters of intent should be submitted on September 9th. And I'll talk a little bit more now about our 6 foundational expectations for partnerships and research. So we've noticed that often the more successful research projects follow these particular foundational expectations. And these expectations are building on evidence and experiences of PCORI-funded awardees. So to address the expectations, in some, I would say that often when maximizing partner contributions throughout all phases of a project, a research project, you're working with the community to develop the research questions, and then you're ensuring that community members are involved in the conduct of the research and determining what sites should be used. And also including those folks in feedback, right? So patients have an opportunity to see folks who look like them involved in a project. And it's not just completely researcher-led. There's an importance to facilitating engagement discussions and planning for patient CER. There's also the need to utilize certain making sure that people understand what their potential role could be on a project. And PCORI also requires that there is dedicated funding for people who are going to be engaged in that research project. Let's see. All right. So related to that, some additional aspects of a research proposal generally include a clear description of the clinical burden or evidence gap. They also include well-designed pragmatic study with a strong conceptual framework that has the potential to yield results that can be rapidly translated into clinical decision-making. We've seen that excellent patient-centeredness and engagement, including representative patient advisory boards, and ensuring that patient advisory boards also have the decision-making authority, right? So like if something needs to change in the project, making sure that patients still have that opportunity to give some direction to the project. And I guess in closing, I'll just share, these are our socials. Please follow us on the socials. I hope that this information that I've shared has been somewhat informative, particularly about the upcoming funding opportunities, and then also just helping you to see how your voice can then impact research, how you, and in your next exercise, I believe you'll be identifying research questions using the PCOTS framework. So really give that some thought. I think you may not be focusing on the setting, but at the same time, like looking at the population, looking at what interventions can be compared, and then also ensuring that the outcomes that are most important to you are going to be reflected in what your eventual research questions will be.